Hello and welcome. You're about to watch the first of our anxiety videos, What is Anxiety? As part of the Wellbeing Education Resilience Programme. We would like to highlight the Face COVID video by Russ Harris. If you haven't already seen it, please take 5 minutes to watch as it gives a great overview of how to support wellbeing as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can click directly on the link when viewing this presentation in slideshow mode. This video will be looking at what is anxiety. Some of the topics touched upon in this video may be discussed in further detail in the concept index, which will be indicated by this icon. It may also be in one of the other webinar videos in the programme. This will also be indicated to you. It may be helpful to take a moment to familiarise yourself with some of the other video webinar titles that we cover. Should you have any questions in regards to these videos, please forward these to your mental health lead and they can be discussed in one of our network meeting Q&As. For this presentation, it will be helpful for you to have some understanding around the concepts highlighted in this slide. If you're not familiar with these, you can find out more about them in the concept index. Here you can see what will be covered in this presentation. If you see the thought bubble symbol, it will mean there is an activity for you to have a go at should you wish to. Simply pause the video and give it a go. Remember to always be kind to yourself when watching these video presentations. Be aware of how you're feeling throughout, and should you need to, take a break or check in with a friend. There are also some suggestions on the last slides for places you can go if you would like to seek further support.
Anxiety can present very differently among different people. Take the time to think about some of your students who may present in these ways. What is anxiety? Anxiety is a feeling of fear or panic. Feeling generally anxious sometimes is normal. Most people worry about something: money, exams, health. But once the difficult situation is over, you generally feel better and calm down. If you find that the difficult situation has gone, but the feelings of fear and panic remains or get stronger, that's normally a sign of anxiety becoming a problem.
So to get an idea of where anxiety sits in relation to our stress levels, we're going to have a look at what is stress and what is the point to stress. So stress is actually very normal and it can be helpful in lots of situations. For example, if we've got a deadline of when a piece of work needs to be done, that deadline may bring about a slight amount of stress. Without that stress, we might not be motivated and activated enough to get the work done at a faster pace. So that kind of stress can be helpful. It's part of everyday life, but it can become a problem. It can become a problem when the level of emotional arousal in our brains becomes slightly too high and it interferes with our everyday life. So as you can see, anxiety sits in between stress and panic.
Why do we have anxiety? So we all experience anxiety from time to time, and it's actually there to keep us safe. So it can be a positive thing. So anxiety is our body's natural reaction to danger, and our fight, flight, freeze response is our body's stress response. So this is there to keep us safe from perceived threats. And what happens in the body is that this fight, flight, freeze response, when we're feeling anxious, instantly causes different hormonal and physiological changes in us to prepare our body to survive. So specifically with fight or flight, this is more of an active defence mechanism, where you might see someone maybe becoming quite angry or trying to obviously fight a situation head on to keep safe. or you might see flight, so trying to escape and avoid a situation that's causing us anxiety. With those kind of stress responses as well, you're going to feel those different feelings like a fast heart rate, sweaty palms, maybe shaking. And this is happening in us to prepare us to, like I said, either fight or to get away from that situation. So those changes in our body are actually there for a reason. And also freeze is fight or flight on hold. So you might become completely stuck and frozen, and that might be to either stop and think about the next move to keep you safe, or ultimately as a way to hide and be still. But you might notice similar physiological sensations or symptoms in the body as well with the freeze response. But ultimately, what we want to take away from this is that this fight, flight, freeze response isn't a conscious decision. It's something we all have built in us, and it's our survival instinct, as I said, that's been around in all of us for many, many years. Sometimes this response can become overactive. There's various different reasons for that, and you can watch the video there for a deeper explanation of that. But different life experiences, maybe trauma, and things like that can impact whether our stress response is overactive. And what that means is that we might be getting this fight, flight, freeze response, seeing those different things, feeling those different changes in our body happening more often than it needs to. So we might be perceiving situations as unsafe when actually they are safe. And we might see that as well in children and young people too. So what we need to do is obviously have an awareness of this and when it's activating and what we can do to help alleviate those symptoms and manage it a bit better.
When we come up against something anxiety provoking, we'll experience the following 4 symptoms. Cognitive. These are our thoughts. The thoughts we have with anxiety are generally negative and will create or feed the anxiety. Physical. These are the physical sensations we feel in our body as a result of the fight, flight, freeze response. Behaviour. This is the behaviour we will display as a result of our anxiety. These can usually be recognised as fight, flight, freeze, or flop behaviours. Emotional. These are the emotions that come alongside anxiety as a result of how we think, feel, or act. All of these symptoms will be explained further in the next 5 slides. Our cognitive symptoms are also regularly referred to as cognitive distortions or thinking errors. By thinking in these ways, we are likely to make a situation that is not threatening to us feel as though it is. It can also exaggerate any feelings of anxiety or fear that may already be there. They are usually negative thoughts about a situation, thing, or place, or they can be negative thoughts about ourselves. Should you want more information on these distortions, each one is explained in the concept index. Alternatively, feel free to pause the video now and take some time to look through the list.
When you're feeling anxious or scared and in your fight, flight, freeze mode, your body releases stress hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol. These can cause physical symptoms such as increased heart rate, increased sweating, and in some people it can cause panic attacks. These symptoms can be very worrying and often make us wonder if there's something wrong, but it's normally just the response to the adrenaline in our body. One way to alleviate some of these symptoms is to exercise, literally to burn off all of that adrenaline that's going round in your body and creating these physical symptoms.
Leading on from the physical symptoms, we have some different emotional symptoms on the screen here as well. So we might be feeling things like defeat, guilt, uselessness, I think is quite a big one with anxiety as well, especially as we know anxiety can get in the way of our day-to-day life and us actually doing and feeling like we're able to do what it is that we want to do, because anxiety is taking over. So that can possibly lead us to feeling quite useless because we're not able to do those things. Anger as well, thinking back to that fight, flight, freeze response. So anger would fall under the fight response. So it could possibly mean actually that anxiety is underneath that anger. Becoming embarrassed, ashamed, lonely and sad as well. So maybe feeling like you're the only one experiencing this, maybe feeling like you can't share it with other people because you feel ashamed, when we know that everyone actually experiences anxiety and it's a completely normal feeling to have. So I'll just let you have a look over those different emotional symptoms and have a think about maybe what you can see in yourself and what you might see in some children and young people as well, and to unpick how possibly there's different feelings underneath that anxiety.
When we feel anxious, we tend to behave in several ways to protect ourselves. These may fall under fight, flight, or freeze behaviours, such as acting out in angry or aggressive ways. This would be considered a fight behaviour. It may be to avoid people, places, and situations, or to actually run and escape from them. You may recognise this in students who always ask to leave the room during a certain topic or lesson. This would be a flight behaviour. Some people may actively hide or try their hardest not to be seen or noticed. You may have a student who is very quiet and causes no trouble at all, but does not get much work done. This would be freeze behaviours. Some other anxious behaviours you may see are counting, washing, checking, organising, or touching things in order to stop something bad from happening. These thoughts of something bad happening are often directed to loved ones. Similarly, to ask questions or say certain words to stop something bad from happening. These are both behaviours associated with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and you may want to seek advice before supporting a student who displays these behaviours. Other common behaviours would be needing to have things for comfort, such as a toy or item a loved one may have given them. As adults, these items may be different, such as needing a friend to come somewhere with you, or having to wear a particular item of clothing as good luck. It could be that the child wants to stay close to what makes them feel safe, whether that be a parent or a carer, or staying in the house. All of these behaviours are safety behaviours. So what are safety behaviours? They are actions that we take to make us feel more comfortable with whatever is making us feel anxious. However, they are only beneficial in the short term, because although they make us feel better in the moment, they do not help us to manage anxiety in the long term. They usually consist of avoidance, escaping leaving situations, reassurance seeking, and using something as a comfort in an anxiety-provoking situation. Relying on these behaviours makes us feel that we can't face whatever it is that makes us anxious without doing them. For example, if a child completes their first weeks of school with their teddy by their side, they may start to feel they can only do it when they have their teddy with them. Or if someone relies on counting or sorting, ritualistic behaviours as we also call them, they may start to feel that the only reason nothing bad happened is because they did that behaviour rather than because that situation is not actually a threat. Avoidance behaviours can also reinforce the thought that something is a threat. If you were safe and felt better when you avoided it, then it must have been something bad, right? It is more important for us to face our anxieties in order to manage them. This will be explored further in the other anxiety videos. You may recognise this slide from the start of this presentation. After listening to some of the previous slides, you may now recognise some of these behaviours as our anxious stress response behaviours. Hopefully, as a result, you will now be able to see that these children, although appearing very different in personality, may actually all be very anxious. It is, however, important to acknowledge that not all people, especially our young people, will show their anxious behaviours. This is called masking, and some of us are very skilled at this. Those young people may demonstrate more of their anxious behaviours at home because they have been holding them in all day at school. We can compare this to a bottle of fizzy drink. Our anxious feelings and thoughts have been bubbling away inside all day and not been let out through behaviour. We may also have had some experiences through the day that have triggered our anxiety and shaken our bottle just a little bit more, making the bubble pressure higher and higher. Then as soon as we get home, we open the bottle lid and the fizzy pop comes flying out and spraying everywhere. We can avoid this happening when we get home by loosening the lid just a little bit throughout the day in order to let some of the fizz out. This can be done by our friends, school staff, and other coping strategies that we learn. Sometimes just a simple hello from someone to make us feel seen and acknowledged can help with this. Coping strategies are explored further in Anxiety Video 3.
So having a look now at the different triggers with anxiety. So we've got some different examples on the screen here. So people, for example, your boss, animals, birds, insects, different places, different situations, or other people's actions. So all of these things can trigger anxiety within us. But it's really important as well that we're aware that our thoughts about these things that we can see on the slide is actually what contributes to causing the anxiety. We are going to have a look in a bit more detail next at how our thoughts interact with our feelings and ultimately affect our behaviour as well. But just having a think about these different triggers here, if we think about two people that might experience the same situation or trigger, for example, a dog, one person might be feeling completely comfortable in the presence of that dog and feel happy and safe, whereas another person might perceive that situation as unsafe, and then this might activate their fight, flight, freeze response. They might be getting all those uncomfortable physiological symptoms with anxiety, and then ultimately this is going to obviously impact how they're feeling in that moment and then how they act. They might try to escape the situation, they might become angry, or they might freeze. So just thinking about that there is a point I want you to think about when we continue through the rest of the slides. Just how our thoughts actually can affect how we kind of think towards these different triggers and how this impacts our feelings and our behaviour.
According to the cognitive behavioural therapy (CBT) approach to anxiety, one of the reasons that overcoming anxiety can be so difficult is that anxiety generates vicious cycles involving your physiological, cognitive, behavioural and emotional domains. In CBT, the vicious cycle begins with an anxiety-provoking situation, a trigger. This situation can be something external, such as a work commitment, a social engagement, or an event happening in the future that you're worried about. Anxiety can also be provoked or triggered by something internal, such as a physiological sensation, a thought about something you're dreading, or an unpleasant emotion. This anxiety-provoking situation then triggers a vicious cycle involving the 4 domains as depicted on the slide. For example, you're at a social event and feeling shy. This triggers a physiological response such as an increased heart rate or blushing or sweaty hands. You become aware of this physiological symptom and think, "Oh no, everyone just saw me blush," or "What am I going to say? I have nothing to talk about." This thought can lead to more physiological symptoms, or perhaps it leads to an emotional response and you start feeling nervous or scared. This will then lead to behaviour such as stuttering or mumbling your words or just not saying anything. which will again then lead to another thought, such as, I'm making a fool of myself, or why did I even bother to come? This can lead and feed into further physiological thoughts, emotions and behaviours, and each in turn generate increased anxiety. We now want to take some time to look at our own anxieties, try to identify our own triggers, what things make us anxious. And these situations are often influenced by our core beliefs and our past experiences. So if we try and take some time to think about noticing what are the thoughts that I'm having in relation to this anxiety trigger, this situation. What are the physical symptoms? What emotions am I feeling? And what are my behaviours? And just noticing how each of these interact with the other and how they can create and increase anxiety. One of the key things in overcoming anxiety is to break the cycle before it begins to gain momentum. We often don't have much control over the initial response to the anxiety-provoking trigger, but once we become aware that something has triggered an anxiety-related thought, feeling, behaviour or physiological symptom, we can choose how we react. There are many ways in which to do this: challenging our thoughts, encouraging ourselves to think differently about the trigger, and acting differently, being mindful about our behaviours and how we respond. Also using mindfulness as a way to alleviate some of the physical symptoms and to stop the vicious cycle from getting started.